He saw his father, and the world tilted on its axis. Not just his father, but the two shadows that were always stitched to the old man's heels. Men with faces like granite tombstones. They stood before her. Before Lena. Jinwoo's breath hitched, a shard of ice lodging itself in his throat. He was across the street, the window of the small, unassuming bookstore framing a scene of absolute horror. His father, Chairman Kwan, a man whose quietest words could topple governments and end lives, was speaking to the only woman who had ever made Jinwoo feel like a man instead of a monster. And his father was smiling, a predator's thin curve of the lips that promised nothing but ruin. He didn't wait for the light to change. He didn't hear the blare of a taxi's horn or the screech of tires. The sounds of the city dissolved into a dull, distant roar, replaced by the frantic thunder of his own heart against his ribs. He just ran. He sprinted, his bespoke Italian leather shoes slapping against the asphalt, his mind a screaming void of a single, desperate prayer. Not her. Please, not her. The expensive fabric of his suit jacket strained across his shoulders as he moved, a blur of gray and white against the city's grimy backdrop. He saw Lena's face, pale and tight with a fear she was trying so desperately to conceal behind a shield of defiance. He saw his father's hand move, perhaps to gesture, perhaps to offer the envelope he held. It didn't matter. It was a violation, a trespass on sacred ground. And for the first time in a life defined by cold, calculated control, Jinwoo Kwan felt the blinding, incandescent fury of a man about to lose everything. He was no longer a kingpin, no longer an heir. He was just a man, sprinting without hesitation toward the only thing that had ever truly mattered. 3 months earlier, the world had been a different color. It had been shades of gray, charcoal, and the deep blood red of the velvet lining his private booths. Jinwoo Kwan existed in a world of shadows and whispers, a kingdom built on the bones of his grandfather's ambition and cemented by his father's ruthlessness. He was the heir to the Sinsadong Syndicate, a sprawling empire with polished, legitimate fronts in shipping and construction, and dark, ugly roots in everything that festered beneath the city's gleaming surface. His life was a cage, exquisitely gilded, but a cage nonetheless. Each day a meticulous performance of power and control. He was lonely in a way that only the obscenely powerful could be, surrounded by people but seen by none. Then he saw her. It was in Eclat, one of his own restaurants, a place so exclusive that its patrons' net worth could rival a small country's GDP. He was there for a meeting, a tedious affair of threats veiled as negotiations. He was bored, he was tired. His gaze drifted from the simpering face of the man across the table, scanning the room with a practiced, dismissive air. And then his eyes landed on her, and the world simply stopped. She was a waitress. She moved with a harried grace, her black uniform simple, functional, and utterly incongruous with the opulent surroundings. She was not the type of woman who usually populated his world, not the polished, surgically perfected dolls who dripped with diamonds and desperation. Her hair was pulled back in a simple style that failed to contain a few rebellious curls around her face. Her skin was the rich, warm color of coffee and cream, but it was her eyes that snared him. They were deep and intelligent, carrying a weariness that spoke of long hours and real-world struggles, but they held a spark, a flicker of fierce, unyielding life. As he watched, a notoriously difficult patron, a tech billionaire with a god complex, snapped his fingers at her. Jinwoo's jaw tightened. He saw the flicker of annoyance in her eyes, quickly masked by a professional, practiced smile. She handled him with a calm dignity that the man's billions could not buy. In that moment, watching her navigate the petty tyranny of the wealthy, Jinwoo felt a jolt, a profound and inexplicable connection that was so alien to him it felt like a physical blow. It was a frozen moment, an entire universe contracting to the space she occupied. He didn't know her name. He knew nothing about her. But in that instant, a cold, desolate part of his soul he hadn't even known existed cracked open, and a single, desperate thought bloomed. Mine. Lena Washington hated her job at Eclat. She hated the condescending smiles, the entitled patrons, and the feeling that she was a ghost polishing silverware for the gods on Olympus. But the tips were good, better than anywhere else, and her son, Leo, had a persistent cough that the doctor wanted to run more tests for. So she smiled when she wanted to scream. She said, "Right away, sir," when she wanted to say something much shorter and sharper, and she counted the minutes until she could trade her stiff uniform for worn-out jeans and pick up her 6-year-old from her friend Chloe's apartment. Her life was a tightrope walk over a chasm of unpaid bills and unexpected expenses. She was a single mother in one of the most expensive cities in the world. A cliché she was living with bone-deep exhaustion. Love was a luxury she couldn't afford, a complication she didn't need. Her focus was singular. Leo. His safety, his happiness, his future. Everything else was just noise. Then the noise got a name. Jin-Woo Kwon. He started appearing at the restaurant, not just for meetings, but alone. He always requested her section. The first time, she had been a bundle of nerves. He was, without a doubt, the most intimidatingly handsome man she had ever seen. He sat with an unnerving stillness, his dark suit impeccable, his presence sucking the air out of his immediate vicinity. He had a face that looked like it was carved from marble by an artist who specialized in beautiful, angry angels. A faint, silvery scar disappeared just below his sharp jawline, a subtle hint of violence that his polished exterior couldn't quite conceal. "What would you like to order, sir?" she had asked, her voice betraying none of the frantic thumping in her chest. He had looked up from the menu, and his eyes, dark, intense, and impossibly deep, met hers. For a second, she felt utterly transparent, as if he could see every bill she had taped to her refrigerator, every worry that kept her up at night. "What do you recommend?" His voice was a low, smooth baritone with an accent she couldn't quite place. It was like dark chocolate and whiskey. "The pan-seared scallops are the chef's specialty," she said, reciting the line she'd been taught. "I'll have that," he said, not breaking eye contact. "And a bottle of your best whiskey, for one." It became a routine. He would come in 2, 3 times a week. He always sat alone, always ordered whatever she recommended without looking at the menu, and always watched her. It was unnerving. His gaze was not lecherous or demeaning like some of the other patrons. It was possessive. It was focused, as if she were the only person in the room. "This is creepy," she told her roommate Chloe one night, kicking off her sensible black shoes and collapsing onto their lumpy sofa. "He just sits there and stares." "Is he hot?" Chloe asked, not looking up from her laptop. "Chloe, that's not the point. He's like super rich, powerful looking, the kind of guy who probably has people's kneecaps broken for fun. So, hot and rich. Lena, this is the plot of every romance novel I've ever read. You're the plucky waitress. He's the mysterious billionaire with a dark past. Just go with it." "This is my life, not a novel," Lena grumbled. "And my life doesn't have room for mysterious billionaires. It has room for paying the rent and hoping Leo doesn't need braces." But she couldn't deny the strange flutter she felt when he was there. His quiet, intense presence was a stark contrast to the loud emptiness of her own life. He never tried to make small talk. He just watched, his expression unreadable. The tips he left were obscene, enough to cover her groceries for a week in a single night. She tried to refuse it once. "Sir, this is too much," she had said, her hand trembling as she held out the leather bill folder containing several crisp $100 bills. He looked from the folder to her face. "Is my patronage not welcome?" "No, of course it is. It's just, this is an excessive tip." "It's what your service was worth to me," he said, his tone final. "Keep it." She felt a flush of anger and humiliation. It felt like charity. It felt like he was buying something. She just wasn't sure what. From his corner table, Jin-Woo watched her retreat, her back ramrod straight. He felt a pang of something he tentatively identified as regret. Min-Jun, his second in command and the closest thing he had to a friend, materialized at his side, as he always did. Your father called again, Min-jun said, his voice low. He's unhappy about the stalled negotiations with the triad. Jin-woo didn't take his eyes off Lena. My father is always unhappy. Min-jun followed his gaze. He was a sharp man who had grown up alongside Jin-woo in the syndicate's brutal world. He understood power, violence, and loyalty. He did not understand this. You've been here 6 times in 2 weeks, Jin-woo. People are noticing. Your father is noticing. Let them, Jin-woo said. He felt a strange, reckless pull toward her, a gravitational force he had no desire to fight. For his entire life he had done what was expected. He had been the dutiful son, the ruthless heir, the cold commander. He had accepted his fate, the gilded cage his birthright. But looking at her, at the stubborn set of her jaw and the fire in her eyes, he felt the first stirrings of rebellion. He didn't just want to watch her anymore. He wanted to know her. Find out everything about her, he ordered Min-jun, his voice quiet but absolute. Her name, where she lives, what she needs. I want to know. Min-jun's expression was carefully blank. Is that wise? I don't care if it's wise, Jin-woo replied, finally turning to look at his friend. I care that it's done. The background check was on his desk the next morning. Lena Washington, 28 years old, mother to a 6-year-old son, Leo Washington. No father listed on the birth certificate. An apartment in a run-down building 3 boroughs away. A mountain of debt from student loans for a degree she never finished and medical bills. A string of low-paying jobs. Reading it felt like a violation, a deep, sickening intrusion into a life she fought so hard to keep afloat. He saw her not just as the captivating woman in the restaurant, but as a fighter, a survivor. The report detailed her son's recurring asthma, the expensive inhalers, the looming specialist appointments. A knot of protectiveness, fierce and unfamiliar, tightened in his chest. He knew he couldn't just shower her with money. Her pride, the very thing he admired so much, wouldn't allow it. He had to be smarter, more subtle. He made a call. The next day, the nonprofit pediatric clinic that Leo attended received a massive anonymous donation, specifically earmarked to cover all outstanding patient balances and fund a new respiratory therapy wing. No one would ever trace it back to him. It was a drop in the ocean of his wealth, but the feeling it gave him, the feeling of easing her burden, even without her knowledge, was worth more than any business deal he had ever closed. That night, he waited for her after her shift. He stood beside his black sedan, a sleek, armored beast that looked alien on the grimy street behind the restaurant. The alley was filled with the stench of garbage and stale grease. When she emerged, she stopped dead, clutching her bag to her chest like a shield. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice sharp with suspicion. "I wanted to talk to you," Jin-woo said, taking a step forward. "Somewhere that isn't my restaurant." "This is creepy. I've said that, right? This is a new level of creepy. Stalking me at my job is one thing, but waiting in a dark alley is a whole other horror movie trope." Her words were a torrent of sarcasm, a shield against the fear that was making her heart race. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. It was the first time she had seen it, and it was like a punch to the chest. "My apologies. My social skills are underdeveloped. My car is right here. I'll take you home." "Absolutely not," she said, shaking her head. "I don't get in cars with strange, mysterious, possibly criminal billionaires." His smile faded. The intensity returned. "I am not a threat to you, Lena." Hearing him say her name was a shock. It felt intimate, proprietary. "How do you know my name?" "I know your name is Lena. You have a son named Leo, and you're the strongest person I have ever met," he said, his voice low and sincere. "Please, let me drive you home. The subways are not safe this late." Every instinct screamed at her to run. This man was dangerous. He radiated a power that was both alluring and terrifying. But the exhaustion of her day, the thought of the long, rattling train ride home, and the undeniable pull she felt toward him warred with her fear. And he knew her son's name. The protectiveness that flared in her was primal. "If you know about my son, you know that I can't afford to make stupid decisions," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Getting into a car with you feels like the stupidest decision I could possibly make." "It will be the safest you have ever been," he promised. The conviction in his voice was absolute. She didn't know why she did it. Maybe it was the exhaustion. Maybe it was the strange, desperate hope that for once, something interesting might happen to her that didn't involve a final demand notice. She took a deep breath. "Fine, but if you try anything, I have pepper spray and I know how to use it." "I would expect nothing less," he said, opening the heavy car door for her. The ride was silent. The interior of the car was a cocoon of soft leather and quiet luxury, a world away from the rattling chaos of the subway. He drove with an easy, focused competence. She watched the city lights blur past, her mind racing. Who was this man? When they pulled up in front of her rundown apartment building, he put the car in park but made no move to get out. "Thank you for the ride," she said, her hand on the door handle. "Lena," he said, stopping her. She turned to face him in the dim glow of the dashboard lights. His face was all sharp angles and shadows, his eyes boring into hers. "Have dinner with me. A real dinner, not as a waitress, but as my guest." "I don't think that's a good idea." "Why not?" "Because people like you and people like me, we don't have dinner. Our worlds don't mix." "I want them to," he said, the words a raw, quiet confession. "I want my world to have you in it." The raw need in his voice undid her. It wasn't a smooth line from a practiced player. It was a stark, almost painful admission. It mirrored a loneliness in her own heart that she rarely dared to acknowledge. "I have to work. I have my son," she said, listing the walls she had built around her life. "Tell me a night you are free. I will handle the rest." Against her better judgment, a word escaped her lips. "Friday. Friday," he repeated, a promise and a vow. On Friday, a sleek black car, different from Jin Woo's but just as imposing, arrived at her apartment. The driver, a stoic man in a suit, informed her that Mr. Kwan had also arranged for a trusted babysitter for Leo. Lena's first instinct was to slam the door. The sheer audacity, the level of control was infuriating. But Chloe, who was there to help her get ready, grabbed her arm. "Hold on," Chloe said. "He got you a sitter? A pre-vetted professional sitter? Lena, this isn't a red flag. This is a green flag the size of Texas. It means he's thinking about the reality of your life. He's not just trying to get you into bed. He's trying to get you out of the house." Reluctantly, Lena had to admit she had a point. The sitter was a warm, grandmotherly woman with impeccable references that Chloe obsessively checked online. When Jin Woo himself arrived at the door a few minutes later, not in a suit but in dark, well-fitting trousers and a soft cashmere sweater, he looked less like a crime lord and more like a man on a first date. He greeted Leo, who was peeking from behind Lena's legs, with a gentle smile. "You must be Leo," he said, crouching down to the boy's level. "I'm Jin Woo. It's a pleasure to meet you." Leo, usually shy, stared at him with wide eyes. "Are you my mom's boyfriend?" Lena's face burned. "Leo, we don't ask people that." Jin Woo's gaze flickered up to meet hers, a silent question in his eyes. "I would very much like to be," he said, his voice soft, directed at both mother and son. He didn't take her to another one of his opulent restaurants. Instead, he had reserved a small, family-owned Italian place in a quiet neighborhood, a place with checkered tablecloths and candle wax dripping down old wine bottles. He had booked the entire restaurant. "Is this legal?" she asked, looking around the empty room. "Just buying a restaurant for the night?" "It ensures our privacy," he said simply, pulling out her chair. The awkwardness she had feared never came. He asked her questions, not about her struggles, but about her dreams. He asked what degree she had been studying for, art history, and listened with rapt attention as she spoke about her passion for Renaissance painters. He asked about Leo, what he liked to play, what made him laugh. He spoke little about himself, deflecting her questions with vague answers about being in family business and international logistics. She knew he was hiding something. A man with his kind of wealth and power didn't get it from shipping crates alone. The scar on his jaw was a testament to a life she couldn't imagine. But as the night went on, she saw past the intimidating exterior. She saw a man who was deeply, profoundly lonely. She saw the way his eyes softened when he smiled, the way he listened as if her words were the most important thing in the world. For the first time in years, Lena felt seen. Not as a single mom, not as a waitress, but as a woman. When he took her home, he walked her to her door. The hallway of her building was poorly lit and smelled of old cabbage. It was a world away from his. "I had a really nice time," she said, the words feeling inadequate. "As did I," he said. He stood a few feet away, making no move to touch her. The air between them crackled with unspoken tension. "Lena, yes, I am not a good man," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "My world is complicated and dark. You should know that." "Why are you telling me this?" she asked, her heart beginning to pound. "Because I intend to keep seeing you," he said, his gaze unwavering. "And I want to be as honest as I am able to be. For now." He didn't kiss her. He simply held her gaze for a moment longer, a silent, burning promise passing between them, before turning and walking away. Lena leaned against her door, her legs weak. Chloe was right. This was exactly like a romance novel, and she was terrified she was already falling for the villain. The weeks that followed were a surreal dream. Jin-woo entered her life and Leo's with a quiet, steady persistence. He never overstepped. He showed up for dinner with takeout, sitting on their floor to build elaborate Lego castles with Leo. He took them to the park, pushing Leo on the swings with a look of unguarded tenderness on his face that made Lena's chest ache. He learned about Leo's asthma and had the air quality in their old, dusty apartment tested, installing a state-of-the-art purification system under the guise of it being a new product his company was testing. Lena let him in. Bit by bit, she dismantled her walls. She fell for the man who read bedtime stories to her son in a low, rumbling baritone. She fell for the man who looked at her not with pity, but with a fierce, burning admiration. She was aware, always, of the abyss of what she didn't know about him. The darkness he had hinted at was a constant presence, a shadow at the edge of their sunlit afternoons in the park. But she chose, for the moment, to ignore it. She chose to be happy. This newfound happiness was not without its own set of problems. Chairman Kwon was not a man who tolerated distractions, and he certainly did not tolerate his heir, the future of their dynasty, spending his time with a penniless single mother. The tension between father and son, always a low hum of disapproval, escalated into a sharp, grating conflict. "She is a nobody," Chairman Kwon stated one evening in his stark, minimalist office that overlooked the city from the 81st floor. He didn't yell. He never yelled. His voice was a blade of ice. "A distraction from your duties. You are neglecting the business. The triad issue remains unresolved because your head is in the clouds with this woman." "Her name is Lena," Jin-woo said, his voice dangerously quiet. He stood before his father's desk, not sitting, refusing the illusion of comfort. "And she is not a distraction. She is the first real thing in my life." "Real?" The chairman scoffed, a dry, rattling sound. "A boy from the street with a knife is real. A betrayal from a trusted partner is real. This is a weakness, Jin-woo, an indulgence, and we do not have the luxury of weakness." He steepled his fingers, his cold eyes narrowing. "End it, before I am forced to end it for you." The threat hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Jin-woo felt a cold dread mixed with a white-hot rage. His father saw Lena as a pawn to be removed from the board. He did not understand that for Jin-woo, she was the board, the game, the entire reason for playing. "You will not go near her," Jin-woo said, the words a low growl. It was the first time he had ever openly defied his father's will. "You will not touch her. You will not even say her name. Is that understood?" The chairman's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. He saw the shift in his son. The quiet obedience was gone, replaced by something hard and unyielding, something dangerous. He said nothing, simply staring at Jin Woo, and the silence was a declaration of war. The breaking point came on a Tuesday. It was a beautiful, crisp autumn day. Jin Woo had taken the afternoon off, an act of rebellion in itself, and had taken Lena and Leo to a small street fair. The air was filled with the scent of popcorn and grilled hot dogs. Leo, his face sticky with cotton candy, was laughing with pure, unadulterated joy. Lena was watching him, a real, radiant smile on her face. In that moment, surrounded by the mundane beauty of a normal life, Jin Woo allowed himself to imagine a future where this was his reality. Then his phone buzzed. It was Min Jun. The message was terse. Rivals. The docks. It's bad. A cold wave washed over him, extinguishing the warmth of the afternoon. A faction of the Yakuza, trying to muscle in on their port operations, had grown bold. This was the consequence of his perceived weakness. "I have to go," he said to Lena, his voice tight. The shift in his demeanor was so abrupt that her smile faltered. "What is it? Is everything okay?" "It's business. A problem I have to deal with personally." He crouched down and ruffled Leo's hair. "I'll see you soon, champ." He wanted to kiss Lena. He wanted to hold her and tell her that everything would be fine, but he couldn't. The lie would have choked him. He just gave her a long, desperate look before turning and striding away, leaving her and Leo in their bubble of sunshine as he descended back into the shadows. But the shadows had a way of bleeding. Lena decided to surprise him. She knew he worked late, that his logistics business was demanding. After putting Leo to bed, she packed up some of the pasta she'd made for dinner and, feeling bold, took a cab to the address of his company headquarters he'd once mentioned. It was a sleek, imposing skyscraper in the financial district. She figured she'd just drop it off with the security guard. As her taxi pulled up, she saw it. A black car, one of Jin Woo's, was parked haphazardly at the curb, its door ajar. And then she saw him. He was standing near the entrance to a dark service alley next to the building, his back to her. He was talking to two other men, his posture radiating a cold, lethal authority she had never seen before. She started to get out of the cab to call his name, a smile on her face. The smile died before it was born. One of the men lunged at Jin Woo with something that glinted under the streetlight. It was a knife. Lena's breath caught in her throat, a silent scream trapped behind her teeth. The next 2 seconds unfolded in a horrific balletic display of violence that would be seared into her memory forever. Jin Woo moved with a speed and brutality that was terrifying. He sidestepped the lunge, his arm a blur as he caught the man's wrist, twisting it with a sickening crack of bone. The knife clattered to the pavement. In the same fluid motion, he drove his elbow into the man's throat, who crumpled to the ground, gagging. The second man, seeing his partner fall, pulled a gun. He never had a chance to aim it. Jin Woo was on him in an instant, his movements precise and economical. He disarmed him with brutal efficiency, slamming the man's head against the brick wall with a dull, wet thud. The man slid to the ground, unconscious. Jin Woo stood over the two fallen men, breathing heavily. He wasn't the gentle man who built Lego castles. He wasn't the lonely soul who listened to her talk about art. This was a different creature entirely, a predator, a killer. Then he turned, and he saw her. Standing by the open taxi door, her face a mask of white, shocked horror. The container of pasta had fallen from her hands, its contents splattered across the dirty pavement. Their eyes met across the distance, and in that moment, the beautiful, fragile world they had built together shattered into a million pieces. He walked toward her, his steps heavy. He looked from her terrified face to the spilled pasta on the ground. A look of utter devastation crossed his features, more profound than any physical blow. "Lena," he breathed, his voice raw. She finally found her voice, a choked, trembling whisper. "What was that? Who are you?" He didn't try to lie. He didn't try to soften it. The time for that was over. "Come with me," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. He paid her taxi driver an exorbitant amount, dismissed him, and led her, numb and shaking, into the silent, imposing lobby of his building. He took her up a private elevator to his penthouse, a vast, sterile space with panoramic views of the city lights that suddenly seemed cold and mocking. He poured her a glass of brandy, his hands unsteady. She didn't take it. She just stood in the middle of the enormous living room, wrapping her arms around herself. "You need to tell me," she said, her voice stronger now, laced with a fear that was quickly turning to ice. "You need to tell me everything. Right now." And so he did. He confessed everything. He told her about the Sinsadong Syndicate, the empire his grandfather had built. He told her about his father, Chairman Kwan, and the legacy of violence and power he had been born into. He didn't spare the ugly details, the extortion, the violence, the dark money that flowed through the veins of their legitimate businesses. He laid his monstrous life bare before her, piece by bloody piece. "My name is Kwon Jin-woo," he finished, his voice hollow, "and I am the head of a criminal family. This is the darkness I warned you about." Lena listened, her expression unmoving, but inside, her world was collapsing. Every tender moment, every gentle smile was now cast in a sinister new light. The expensive gifts, the anonymous donations, the way he seemed to solve her problems with a single phone call. It all made a horrible, terrifying kind of sense. The power she had found so alluring was the power of a crime boss. The safety she had felt in his arms was the safety provided by a man who broke other men in back alleys. "Leo," she whispered, the name a prayer and a curse. "My son was with you. I let him near you." The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow, and she staggered back, a sob catching in her throat. "I would never, ever let anything happen to him," Jin-woo said, taking a step toward her, his hands outstretched. "Lena, I swear on my life." "Your life?" she cried, her voice breaking. "Your life is this. It's guns and knives and men bleeding in alleys. What did you think was going to happen? That we could just play house? That your world wouldn't eventually come for us?" "I thought I could keep it separate," he said, his voice ragged with desperation. "I was a fool. I know that now." "Yes, you were," she said, tears streaming down her face now, hot tears of fear and betrayal. "And I was a bigger one for believing in this fairy tale." She looked at him, at the handsome face she had come to adore, and saw a stranger, a monster, a man whose hands, the same hands that had so gently held hers, were stained with a darkness she couldn't comprehend. "I can't do this," she whispered, shaking her head. "I can't. I have a child to protect. His safety is the only thing that matters. I can't have him in a world where this—" She gestured vaguely at him, at the opulent room, at the violence she had witnessed. "Where this is normal," the painful goodbye. It wasn't a single dramatic moment. It was a slow, agonizing tearing apart. Every word he said to try and convince her that he could protect her, that he could change, only reinforced the terrifying reality of his life. "I love you, Lena," he said, the words torn from the deepest part of him, a confession more profound than any of his crimes. The words that should have been a balm were instead a final, fatal cut. "Don't," she sobbed. "Don't say that. It doesn't change anything. It just makes it hurt more." She had to leave. She had to run. Not just from him, but from the person she had become with him. The woman who had been willing to ignore the darkness for a taste of light. She backed away from him toward the elevator. "This is goodbye, Jin-woo." He didn't try to stop her. He just stood there, his face a mask of shattered agony as the elevator doors slid shut, separating them. He watched her disappear, and in the reflection on the polished steel doors, he saw a man utterly and completely alone. The king and his castle, his kingdom now nothing but a prison of cold glass and empty air. The days that followed were a special kind of hell for them both. For Lena, it was a return to a life of quiet desperation. But now it was haunted by the ghost of what she had lost. She quit her job at Eclat, unable to bear the thought of him walking in. She found a new job waitressing at a drab 24-hour diner where the tips were terrible and the customers were surly. It was safer. It was miserable. Every siren she heard made her jump. Every well-dressed man who glanced her way sent a spike of fear through her. She missed him with an ache that was physical, a hollow space in her chest that never went away. She missed his quiet presence, his rare smiles, the way he looked at her son. Chloe tried to comfort her. "You did the right thing, Lena," she'd say. "You had to protect Leo." "I know," Lena would whisper, staring out the window of her cramped apartment. "I know." But knowing it didn't make the pain any less. She felt like she had cut off a limb to save the rest of her body. She was safe, but she was no longer whole. For Jinwoo, the world lost its color again. He threw himself back into his work with a cold, terrifying fury. The man who had shown Lena his gentle side was gone, buried under layers of ice. He was ruthless in his negotiations, brutal with his enemies. He solidified his power, crushing the Yakuza faction that had dared to challenge him. His father was pleased. The syndicate was stronger than ever, but Jin Woo was a ghost haunting his own life. The penthouse felt cavernous. The expensive whiskey tasted like ash. He had Min Jun watch her. From a distance. Just to make sure she was safe. It was a self-inflicted torture. Min Jun's reports were terse and painful. She started a new job. She looks tired. Leo started first grade. Every detail was a fresh stab to his heart. He had offered her a world of luxury, but all she had ever wanted was a world of safety, and that was the one thing he couldn't give her. The guilt was a physical weight pressing down on him, suffocating him. He knew he had to change. The thought, once a fleeting fantasy, now became an obsession. He couldn't just want a different life. He had to build it. But how? How did one dismantle an empire of shadows that had been built over generations? His father would never allow it. His own men who had pledged their lives to this world, would see it as a betrayal. Leaving wasn't a matter of walking away. It was a matter of surviving the exit. The catalyst came 3 months after she left. He had just concluded a brutal meeting, solidifying a new shipping route that was 90% legitimate and 10% not. He was washing the metaphorical blood from his hands when Min Jun called, his voice tight with urgency. "It's your father. He found her." Jin Woo's blood ran cold. "What? Where?" "A bookstore near her new apartment. He's talking to her now. He has Kang and Park with him." Kang and Park, his father's personal enforcers. Men who did the wet work. Men who made problems disappear permanently. And that was when he ran. He burst from the meeting room, leaving his stunned lieutenants behind, and sprinted for the elevator, his mind a roaring inferno of terror and rage. He ran through the lobby, out onto the street, and into the traffic, a man possessed. Not her. Please, not her. He burst through the door of the little bookstore, the bell above it jingling violently. The scene was exactly as he had imagined, a nightmare brought to life. His father stood before Lena, who was backed against a shelf of poetry books. Chairman Kwan was holding an envelope thick with cash. Kang and Park stood by the door, blocking any escape. "I believe this will be sufficient for you and the boy to start a new life," the chairman was saying, his voice smooth as silk and sharp as a razor. "Somewhere far away. Consider it a severance package for services rendered to my son." Lena's face was ashen, but her chin was high. "I don't want your money." "Everyone wants my money," his father replied with a thin, cruel smile. "It's just a matter of price. Perhaps you don't understand the alternative." "Father." The word cut through the tense air like a gunshot. Chairman Kwan turned, his composure cracking for a fraction of a second when he saw Jin Woo, his chest heaving, his eyes blazing with a fury the old man had never witnessed. "Jin Woo," he said, regaining his composure. "You are interrupting a delicate business transaction." "Get away from her!" Jin Woo snarled, moving to stand between his father and Lena, shielding her with his body. He could feel her trembling behind him. "She is a problem that needed to be solved," the chairman said coldly. "She is not a problem," Jin Woo said, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "You are." He looked at Kang and Park, the 2 men he had known his whole life, men who had taught him how to fight. Get out, both of you. They hesitated, looking to the chairman for guidance. I said, get out! Jin Woo's roar echoed in the small shop, raw and full of a power that eclipsed his father's. The two enforcers, seeing the murderous intent in the heir's eyes, bowed their heads slightly and exited the store. Now it was just the three of them, father, son, and the woman who stood between them. You have lost your mind, the chairman hissed. You would throw away everything for this nothing? She is everything, Jin Woo said, his gaze locked on his father's. And you are right. I am throwing it all away. Your world, your business, your legacy. I'm done. You cannot just walk away. This is your birthright. Then consider me disowned, Jin Woo retorted. He reached out and took Lena's hand. It was cold and trembling, but she gripped his back. This is my life now. You will never come near her or her son again. If you do, you will learn what happens when the monster you created finally turns on you. The threat was not empty, and his father knew it. For the first time, Chairman Kwan looked at his son and saw not an heir, but an enemy. A more dangerous enemy than any triad or Yakuza boss, because he knew all their secrets. He stared at Jin Woo, his face a mask of cold fury, then turned without another word and walked out of the store. The bell jingled softly as the door closed, leaving Jin Woo and Lena in a stunned silence. He was still holding her hand, his knuckles white. He turned to her, his face etched with pain and desperation. Lena, you have to go, she whispered, pulling her hand away. She was still terrified, still reeling. This just proves it. It will never end. No, he said, shaking his head. This is the end. The end of that life. I'm getting out, for good. I'm going to burn it all to the ground if I have to. I promise you. How? She asked, her voice filled with disbelief. You can't just quit the Mafia. Watch me, he said, his eyes burning with a new, terrifying resolve. I have to do this, to be the man you and Leo deserve. But I need you to wait for me. Please, Lena, just wait for me. She looked at him, at the man who had just declared war on his own family for her. She saw the desperation, but she also saw a sliver of hope, a dangerous, terrifying hope. I can't make any promises. You don't have to, he said. Just don't disappear. And then he was gone, leaving her standing amidst the poetry books, her heart a battlefield of fear and a love she could no longer deny. The next 2 months were a war. Jin Woo called it the cleansing. He began the systematic process of dismantling the criminal elements of his empire. It was a bloody, brutal affair. He cut off the illicit revenue streams, forcing his subordinates to adapt to legitimate business or be cut loose. He met with the leaders of the other syndicates, not to negotiate, but to dictate terms. He was no longer expanding his territory, he was building walls. He used his vast fortune to pay off rivals, to absorb others, and to utterly crush those who refused to accept the new reality. He was betrayed by men he had considered brothers. There were 2 attempts on his life. One ended in a car chase and a shootout that he and Min Jun barely survived. The second was a bomb planted in his office, discovered only moments before detonation. He emerged from the smoke and fire, not weakened, but hardened. Each attack only fueled his resolve. He was fighting for something more than power or money now. He was fighting for a future, for Lena. His father watched from the sidelines, a deposed king witnessing his kingdom being methodically taken apart. He tried to rally loyalists, to stage a coup, but Jin Woo was too fast, too ruthless. He had learned the game at his father's knee, and now he was using that knowledge to tear it all down. Finally, Jin Woo confronted him one last time. He presented his father with a file detailing every crime, every transaction, every murder the chairman had ever sanctioned, along with a one-way ticket to a quiet retirement in Jeju Island. It's over, Jin Woo said. The Kwan name will be known for logistics and technology now, not for this filth. You can retire in peace, or you can face the consequences of your life's work. Defeated, the old man took the ticket. Through it all, Jin Woo kept his promise. He stayed away from Lena, but he made sure she was protected. Min Jun, his ever-loyal friend, had a discreet, professional security team watching her and Leo from a distance she would never notice. Finally, after 2 months of chaos and violence, it was done. The Sensadong Syndicate was dead. In its place stood the K Global Group, a completely legitimate multinational corporation. Jin Woo was still the chairman, still powerful, still wealthy. But the shadows were gone. He was bruised, mentally and physically. A fresh scar now traced a line over his left eyebrow from a piece of shrapnel, but he was free. He stood in front of her apartment building, the same place he had first dropped her off. He wasn't in a suit. He wore simple jeans and a Henley, the clothes of a normal man. He was nervous, more nervous than he had been facing down assassins. What if she hadn't waited? What if the fear was too much? He knocked on the door, it opened, and she was there. She looked tired, but she was beautiful. Her eyes widened when she saw him. She took in his changed appearance, the new scar, the absence of that cold, dangerous aura he used to carry. "Jin Woo," she whispered. "It's done," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "It's all done. I'm out. I'm free." She stared at him, searching his face, his eyes. She saw the truth there. She saw the fight he had been through. She saw the man he had become. For her. Is it really safe?" she asked, the question a fragile breath of hope. "I promise you," he said, his voice cracking. "I will spend the rest of my life making sure you and Leo are safe and happy." He took a hesitant step closer. "I love you, Lena. I never stopped." The dam of her fear, her resolve, her pain, finally broke. A tear traced a path down her cheek, but this time it was a tear of relief, of hope, of a love that had survived the fire. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. She closed the small distance between them and threw her arms around his neck, pulling his head down to hers. The reunion kiss was not gentle. It was desperate, hungry, and full of all the pain and longing of their separation. It was a kiss of forgiveness and a promise of a new beginning. It was the taste of home. He wrapped his arms around her waist, lifting her off her feet, holding her as if he would never let her go again. From the living room, a small voice piped up. "Is that your boyfriend now, Mommy?" They broke apart, laughing through their tears. Jin Woo looked over Lena's shoulder and saw Leo standing there in his superhero pajamas, looking at them with curiosity. Jin Woo smiled, a real, unguarded smile that reached his scarred but hopeful eyes. "Yes, Leo," he said, his gaze returning to Lena's. "I am. And I plan to be for a very, very long time." 1 year later, the city unfolded below the windows of a new penthouse. This one was not a sterile bachelor pad. It was a home. It was filled with light, with the scent of Lena's painting supplies, with the scattered Lego creations of a happy 7-year-old boy. Jin Woo, now the respected chairman of the K Global Group, sat on the floor, helping Leo finish a particularly ambitious spaceship. He wore a soft sweater, and the scar on his eyebrow had faded, a permanent reminder of the war he had won to gain this peace. Lena came and sat behind him, wrapping her arms around his chest and resting her chin on his shoulder. He leaned back into her embrace, a feeling of contentment so profound it almost hurt. He was no longer the lonely king. He was a partner, a father, a man redeemed. "What are you thinking about?" she murmured, kissing the side of his neck. He turned his head, his lips brushing against hers. "I was just thinking," he said, his voice low and full of a love that was now his entire world, "that my life didn't really start until the day I met you." She smiled, her eyes shining. In his, she no longer saw any darkness, only a reflection of her own love, a love that had been strong enough to conquer a criminal empire and build a new world for the three of them, together. This story teaches us that true strength isn't found in power or control over others, but in the courage to change for the better. It shows that love can be a powerful catalyst for redemption, inspiring someone to dismantle a world of darkness to build a future worthy of the person they love. It highlights that everyone, no matter their past, has the capacity for transformation when motivated by a genuine desire to protect and cherish another. We really hope you enjoyed this educational piece of content and hope that you could understand the moral lessons behind it. If you enjoyed this story, please show your support by hitting the like button, subscribing to our channel for more content like this, and sharing it with someone who appreciates tales of love and redemption. What did you think of Jinwoo's decision to declare war on his own family? Was it the only way he could truly be free? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And for our next story, who would you like to see find their own happiness? Let us know by voting in the comments. A. Min Jun, the loyal second-in-command who has to find his own identity outside of the shadows. B. Chloe, the supportive best friend who deserves a grand romance of her own.